Hey everyone, Doc T here. I've got another podcast for you. Hope you're enjoying these. One of the things that is often confusing is what is a compounded drug? What is a generic drug? What is a legend drug? And I want to take a moment to kind of split this up. This won't be a very long podcast, but there's been a lot of discussion in the past, and I think a lot of confusion by people to try to understand what this means. So let's look at it this way. There are three areas that a drug can be classified as far as their safety and efficacy. And we have something called the Food and Drug Administration here in America, and every country has their own equivalent that proves the safety and efficacy of a drug. Efficacy means it's actually going to do what they say it's going to do. So when a drug is created by a drug manufacturer, there are stages, 1, 2, and 3, that they go through where they have an idea. Let's use this kind of drug, this chemical formula that we've discovered, and see if it applies and makes sense and does something. So they do that. They go ahead and put that through. And then the next trial says, okay, let's test it on some animals. And these animals are basically, you've heard guinea pigs, and whether it's right or wrong, we have to put it into a model that's going to work. And in humans, they always test on animals first, just to make sure it's not going to be devastating. That's just what humans do. But for horses, I'm sure that the protocol is a little bit different. I'm sure that they take studies that have been done on mice and rats because they have such a short lifespan, and they try to make sure these things work. And then they do these trials on a population of controlled candidates in the human world or in the horse world, and they apply the medication and do what's called a double-blind, placebo-controlled study with a random selection of animals. It's interesting that in a lot of the studies in humans, they only use one gender of mouse, which I find fascinating. So it works on females, but we didn't test it on the men, the male mice. But I digress, because I think most research is flawed. According to those who are really looking at research, research is horribly flawed because it's just simply bias. A drug manufacturer wants to make money, so they're going to make a drug, and they're going to make sure that it's safe, but they can bend some of the rules to make these drugs come out and say, oh, look, this drug is perfect for this type of disease. But if you go back and look at some of their research, you're going to find that, well, there are certain conditions that are met. And this is why you see a lot of drugs coming out saying, this has not been approved for use in a pregnant mare, for example. I think that's a great example, because we don't know the effects of the fetus in utero. And so we don't want to label it for that. So they select for where they think the drug is going to work. And it's up to us veterinarians to say, well, let's try it on this pregnant mare. And oops, that didn't work. Sorry. But it said it wasn't approved, but we got your permission to use it anyway. And that I'm digressing, and I apologize for that, because research is full of flaws. But double blind means that the person who's administering the drug doesn't know if what they're giving is a placebo, which means it's like a sugar pill, or the real deal, the drug in the pill form actually has the ingredient. Same with injections. And double blind also means that the person who's looking at the data is not privy to knowing which drug, which treatment was given. Was it the placebo or not? They're just looking at the raw data and trying to make conclusions. Interestingly, if any of you horse people have ever used DMSO, dimethyl sulfoxide, which I think is one of the few drugs that I would want on if I were stranded on a desert island, because it is so effective in reducing swelling and reestablishing cellular integrity for any trauma. I think I always have some around. You can't do a placebo on that. because you put the placebo on, like, oh, I'm not tasting it, I'm not breathing it out, I can't smell it. Whereas when you put DMSO, you're getting it. So you can't do a placebo controlled study on DMSO. So we'll never get any studies ever done that will meet the double blind, placebo controlled, randomized selection study of horses and the effects of DMSO. It's just never going to happen unless the researchers can't smell. Anyway, again, I keep digressing, but the more you know about how drugs are put together, the better off you are. And then when they go in phase 3 trials, they get a whole bunch of horses out there in the real world, and they randomize the selection of these horses. Hopefully, they use mares and geldings and stallions, and they make sure they have enough stallions so they can say, yeah, for an intact male, it's going to be different because the hormones that are in stallions aren't there in geldings, and that might make a difference. Who knows? So there's always a bias. There's always a flaw. The bias would be that the drug company wants the drug to work, because if it does, they stand to earn millions and millions and millions of dollars. And in selection, I'll tell you, it's pretty interesting. If I had a drug that cured a disease that you had, and this disease that you have is terminal, and I say, well, I've got this drug that I want to try on you. There's a 50% chance that you're going to die from this drug. You may say, well, I'm going to die anyway, so give it to me. Let me try it. It's, I'm sure that you have my best interest in hand, but I'm going to die anyway. So yeah, I'll go in the trial. Whereas if you don't have the disease and you're a healthy person, and I give you the same drug and say, I'd like you to try this, but there's a 50% chance of you dying, there's going to be a lot of people say, hey, sorry, you can't pay me enough money in the world to take a 50-50 chance with my life for a disease I don't have. So that person will never get in the trial. I think I did a podcast already about the parachute study. Will you jump out of a plane if the parachute that you put on may or may not work? And of course, it depends. If the plane's on the ground not moving, yeah, I'll do that. Give me my $50 and I'll be on my way. So this is the hoops that the scientists and the drug companies go through to get a drug to prove that it's effective and safe for your horse. So when we administer it, we know that it's going to have a 98 or 99% chance that you're going to see the results in your horse, with a very low probability that you're going to have a side reaction. And by the way, in this list here are all the side reactions. A great example is acepromazine. I don't know how many people out there use acepromazine, and they've never actually read the package insert, but it has warnings in there. It says, warnings, be careful with male horses. Male, that means stallions and geldings, because there's a good chance, there is a chance that the penis can drop down and never come back up. It's called penile paralysis. And that's not good, because then the penis will have exposure to the air in the world, and it will become inflamed and swollen, and it has to be amputated. But they never tell you, here, ace your horse. Oops, sorry about that. Didn't know that could happen. But those are the safety things that we want to know about before we administer a drug. And the Food and Drug Administration here in America makes sure that the drug you're giving has known side effects that you're aware of, and that it has potential side effects, but it's probably going to be very effective in what it's licensed for, or it's approved for. And that's important. Approval goes to drugs. Vaccines get licensed. So if your vaccine is a licensed vaccine, we've done all the studies on it. We know it's going to be good. And what's in there is exactly what it says. Same with the approved drug. What's in there is exactly what it is. It's been put together exactly the same way, and is made with the exact ingredients. Every time, it's done. That's what's important about an FDA drug, and they're called legend drugs. A great example is a drug called Rompun, ROMPUN, which we used all the time before dormosan came out. That was a legend drug made by a company that was FDA approved, and it got a patent so nobody else could make it, so they could recoup their money that they invested in it, so they could make their profit. And then after a certain amount of time, they lose the patent on it. Now, when you lose a patent on the drug, then other people can make the same drug using similar ingredients in a similar way, and it has to pass the same scrutiny of the FDA. And I say similar because they're going to use the same ingredients, but the ingredients may not be bought by the same company that made the ingredient. So they're going to be similar, and they're going to be assembled just almost the same way. So you have a like-minded drug. So for instance, we have pharmacies all over our country that make a generic drug that is similar to. And when Rompun lost its patent, we've got a lot of drug companies coming out with named products that were xylazine, which is the chemical name, but they were not Rompun. They were similar to Rompun. And I had personally some side effects to these generic drugs because it wasn't the real deal. And that's okay. I mean, you could have a hamburger made by McDonald's and a hamburger made by Burger King and a hamburger made by Wendy's. And they're all hamburgers, and they all have a quarter pound of beef with a bun and some mustard and ketchup or whatever. And they all look the same, but they can still be a little different, yet they're still called hamburgers. And that's what's really important. So a generic drug is going to be very similar to a legend drug, and both of them are legal to use, honored by the order of a veterinarian. They can prescribe them, and they can be administered to a horse. And finally, the third group. So we have legend drugs, which is the original. You have the generic drugs, which are, once the original has lost its patent, generics that come out that can claim that they are the same, although they're not, but they are. So if you want to get the local brand cough medicine versus the real deal cough medicine, you're probably going to have a pretty close deal. Here's a great example. Acetaminophen. You can buy the grocery stores acetaminophen, the pharmacies acetaminophen, or you can go out and get the real deal called Tylenol, which is the person who owns the patent on it, who lost the patent just because time ran out, and people started to make acetaminophen. So you can either get Tylenol or acetaminophen. Tylenol would be the legend drug. Acetaminophen, made by your local pharmacy or the big chain pharmacy, is going to be a very similar drug and do the same thing for you and cost less. And that's why generic drugs cost less. But are they the same? In most situations, they are. But in some situations, there's some nuances. But we can get around that. But it leads to the third group called compounded drugs. And this is really important to understand. In the United States, it is illegal to make a compounded drug if there's a company making either generic or legend drug. So you cannot compound acetaminophen, which means I'm sitting in my pharmacy and I want to get all the ingredients together and mix it up in my little lab in my back room and sell it as acetaminophen and call it a generic acetaminophen. I can't, because it's not been approved by the FDA. The FDA has not come and done any inspections or analysis for quality and quantity. They cannot assure that the ingredients are in there. And by the way, anything that's put together as a compounded drug is not guaranteed. I'm just brought back to how many people and how many horses and how many animals have actually been killed by compounded drugs. I mean, the numbers are staggering. I took a compounded drug and I died. It happens all the time. The polo players down in Wellington many, many years ago were all administered a drug called Biodil. And Biodil is a drug that's here, made in America, but it's not approved for use in America. And because it's not approved for use in America, it is okay to compound Biodil. Now, Biodil is it enhances mitochondrial function within the cell to give more energy, more bang for your buck. It's like supercharging the cells. And this drug has been approved for use, believe it or not, in cockfighting, where you have these male roosters that are fighting each other till one dies, and people bet on it. And because cockfighting is illegal in America, this drug, even though it's made in America, cannot be used in America. So it's exported. Another example is euthanasia solution for humans. Not allowed in America. It's not made in America. It's not made in many countries. And of course, in the prison systems where the death sentence has been given, it's almost impossible to find the euthanasia solutions that are made legally. They're all compounded and made illegal, and sometimes they slip into the system. So we don't want really compounded drugs. However, compounding occurs all the time. And there are very good companies out there who sell us veterinarians compounded drugs. I'll give you a great example. Everyone's heard of Bute. Butazolidine is a drug that we give as an anti-inflammatory for sore muscles, and we give it all the time. But sometimes horses don't like Bute, and we don't want to pay for a paste. So a compounding company can take Bute and they can add a flavor like apple flavor and mix it all together. And that is a new compound. It's a compounded drug. And that compounded drug is purchased as apple flavored Bute, which is legal because nobody makes apple flavored Bute. But there's no guarantee that in that compounded mixture, that the butazolidine that you're scooping up and putting in horse feed has the actual equivalent of the ratio of active ingredients to inactive ingredients. We hope it does because the compounding pharmacies have their reputation. And what happened to the polo ponies down here with the Biodil is that somebody was asleep at the lab and they put in 10 times the amount of selenium that that drug is supposed to have, 10 times the amount, killed these horses. They dropped within 30 minutes of being administered this drug IV. They just died a horrible death because there's no way anybody could figure out what was going on or how to fix it. So compounded drugs, and when that happened, I started looking at compounded, and there's a bunch of humans in Texas that died of a compounded drug. I've known people who get a reversal yohimbine, and they got it compounded, which is wrong because yohimbine is a legend generic drug you can get, but they bought the compounded just to save some bucks. And these horses are dropping off the needles and dying every time they gave yohimbine. And that was just a travesty. So you have to be very careful of compounded drugs. But your veterinarian and your physician are allowed to compound any drug they want anytime, which is kind of cool because whenever we draw up, let's say xylazine, and we draw up butorphanol in the same syringe, we're compounding a drug. But we do that because we've had other people use that and it's okay. And 99.999% of the horses that get that combination are going to be fine with it. I've been using that combination for decades and never, knock on wood, had a problem. So we're allowed to compound, but nobody else can compound and sell you something. And if they do, it can't be a generic, can't be a legend drug. So that's the idea behind compounded drugs. There's something else I want to say about compounded drugs. It reminds me of all the supplements that are out there. And I'll never forget one group actually took a bunch of supplements. I mean, they just bought a slew of them right off, the internet. They brought them in and they analyzed them. And the equivalents that were on the label ranged from compared to what was actually tested in there ranged from 0% of what they said was in there. In other words, it wasn't in there, to 1,000 times more than what was in there. And you can see all these papers that, you just do some research on it, but you have to be very careful of these compounded supplements as well as compounded anything. If the FDA or the government oversight is not actually testing and making sure that everything is exactly the way it should. And you'll know this because you'll see a lot number and expiration date. And that lot number means this lot has been tested and it's guaranteed what's in it is what's in it. And we have to, as veterinarians, I mean, what would happen if I drew up something and I stuck it in your horse and it wasn't what it said it was supposed to be, and your horse fell off the needle dead? I mean, yes, other than anaphylactic reactions, we don't want to be putting poisons in your horse. So they have to be tested, they have to be validated, they have to be assured and guaranteed before any veterinarian is willing to drop a drug, an antibiotic, an anti-inflammatory, anything that's going to go into your horse. They have to make sure that it's going to do what it does. And this is why all veterinarians use either legend drugs or generic drugs, and they have their choice to do either one. And that goes for prescribing. But when it comes to compounded drugs, please be aware. Every compounded drug out there, even though the compounded companies are absolutely adamant about making sure that their product is 100% guaranteed, and they have a lot of things in place, just keep in mind that there's probably a reason why it's not a generic or a legend drug. And do you have to be making this? And the number one reason people compound is to save you money, to make something cheaper. And as far as I'm concerned, that's just a fool's errand. But that's my little notes on compounded versus generic versus legend. And hopefully that helps explain some things for you. And this little podcast is here to bring you a straight scoop. So you aren't bamboozled, so you aren't having the wool pulled over your eyes, so you can understand why we do some things the way we do them. And now you have that understanding on these types of drugs. So that's it. Doc T out, and I'll see you on the next one. Oh, and don't forget, try to remember, if you like these podcasts, please go and subscribe to them on Apple or Google or Audible or wherever you subscribe to podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Deezer. I'm on all of them. You can just subscribe to them and play them at your leisure. And become a member of the Horses Advocate. I think becoming a member of the Horses Advocate is the best way to connect with me and other like-minded horsemen who want to help horses thrive in a human world. And there I am. There it is. It's right back there. Horses thrive in a human world. Because that's what our goal is. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Hey everyone, Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.